Hello, if you're here for the right and wrong way to bring documentation into your knowledge base with Lawrence Orin, you're in the right place. My name is Scott Abel, and I'll be the host of today's show on the Content Wrangler channel. So welcome and thanks for joining us. Let me tell you a few quick things about the webinar platform. First, we cannot see or hear you, so we don't have access to your camera or microphone, so you don't have to worry about that. Also, chat is one way. I'm going to tell you a little bit later how you can ask a question of the presenter, but please know that the presenter will not be texting you back. And also, we are recording today's show, as we do with all Content Wrangler programs. You can use the URL you're using to watch this webinar today live. And if you return back about a half an hour after the show's over using the same web address, you'll be presented with a recording of today's show that you can share with others, and we hope that you will. Also, if you're having any trouble connecting, you can check out the frequently asked questions we have in the attachments section of the webinar viewing panel. You can go in there for information about how to overcome some audio and visual challenges. All right, and just let's tell you a little bit about our sponsor. I'm super happy to have Zoomin software as our sponsor. Companies spend all kinds of money, literally millions of dollars, creating valuable content, but they package it up as dated, static, and frustrating experience that customers just don't enjoy. Zoomin lets you deliver up-to-date and personalized product answers wherever and whenever your customers need them, whether in your documentation center, inside your actual product, or in your online support portal or online community. Basically, anywhere your customers are is where Zoomin helps you surface up content. You can learn more about the available products from Zoomin Software at their website, zoominsoftware.com. It's also a great place to check out their blog. They've got some interesting articles there. You can find some great content as well. So definitely check out Zoomin Software on the web. And we've got an upcoming conference we'd like to tell you about. It is Information Development World 2020, our annual conference, which we bring together technical, marketing, and product information developers. This year we'll be talking about how to build information-enabled organizations. We'll be joining each other in beautiful Palm Springs, California at the Renaissance Hotel, February 25th through the 27th. We hope that you'll check out the roster of presenters at informationdevelopmentworld.com and consider purchasing a ticket. We've got a great roster of presenters, and we're still accepting slots for speaking. So if you've got a topic you'd like to suggest to us, stop by the website, Information Development World, and submit a proposal. We're going to give away a few conference tickets at the end of the show. All right, about today's webinar. First, we're going to be asking questions of the presenter during the show. So if you hear the presenter talk about a subject and you'd like to know more about it, you can click the Ask a Questions button to text a question to the presenter. They will actually come to me. I'll queue them up, and at the end of the show, I'll ask Lawrence as many questions as time allows. We'll also launch a poll during our webinar. There'll be some on-screen instructions asking you to answer a question that's multiple choice. It's as simple as clicking a button to participate. The presenter uses this information to better fine-tune his presentation and to provide information to you. So definitely when enticed to do so, please participate in the polls. There's additional content, as I mentioned earlier, in the attachments and links section of the webinar viewing panel. In fact, you can get a copy of today's slides. You can request a free demonstration from Zoomin Software. You can get information about the presenter, and also there's a nifty ebook, the product content guide, the missing piece in your marketing strategy, and there's some links to some content provided by our sponsor, as well as some information about how you can become a webinar presenter in the future. One last thing, on the way out the door, if you would rate the presenter using the Rate This tab, it's a 1 through 5-star rating. 5 is a high rating, 1 is low, and the presenters really appreciate the feedback. So please do that on your way out the door. And speaking of presenters, I'd like to welcome our presenter today, Lawrence Orin, to the digital stage. Lawrence, are you on the line?
I am, Scott. Hi.
Hi, thanks for joining us again. I appreciate it. I know that you're broadcasting from a different time zone, so where are you on the planet today?
I'm broadcasting from Tel Aviv, Israel.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you for joining us during this time. I really appreciate it. I'm going to put myself on mute, and I think you know the rest of the drill. You'll do your presentation. I'll be around in the background and queuing up questions from the audience to ask you at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, let me pass the baton to you and let you take it away.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, so hello, everyone. My name is Lawrence Orin. I am the product evangelist and also customer implementation expert here at Zoomin. And this talk today is about bringing your documentation, your product documentation, into your knowledge base and what that involves. Okay, so I'd like to start with a story because this actually happened to me. I have experience of this. I joined a company a few years ago, and they asked me to create a proper documentation site, which until then really had been serving support. Now, of course, I used to lead customer support teams, so I knew what support content looked like. And they wanted me to create proper product documentation, but they wanted me, but they were about to make a large purchase of a knowledge base tool, okay, a support knowledge base tool. And they asked me, even before my first day, they called me and they said, okay, so we want you to evaluate this because we'd like you very much to put your product content into this tool. And of course, that's a lot of pressure because you're new at a company and you want to impress and so on. And at the same time, there's a lot of money riding on this. They are buying this tool. So I took a look, and as I looked, I was checking it out, talking to the vendors. And I was looking at this editor, and it looked very wiki-like and so on. And I was a little bit concerned about the level of single sourcing that I had, and also just trying to figure out how I was going to use this editor to construct these topics. These topics would have steps in them, and notes, and sub-steps, and images, and tables, and bullets inside tables, and so on. And it didn't really look like it was a good fit. And as I kept looking and I looked at the way that the content was being presented, and especially the way that people were able to navigate between topics, which of course is huge when it comes to trying to find content. So it kind of put me in a very awkward position. I could feel that it wasn't a great fit, but it was hard for me to put that into words. Okay, so this session is all about exploring this conundrum that when you are asked, and so we have a polling question here, when you are asked to put documentation into your knowledge base, if you could vote on this question. I see some of you have already started voting. So if you vote on this question, this is the question that I was faced with, and one that I want to go into in this session. Because when you look at a KB tool, and you look at a documentation tool, and you look at a community tool perhaps, they all have this big giant search box on the home page, and it all kind of looks the same. It's all content. It's all there to help customers. So what's the big deal, right? So this was my awkward position that I was put in when I joined this company. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So as I'm seeing the results coming in, it looks like 61% of you so far have said yes to this question that you have been asked. And nearly 10% of, that's going up even higher. And nearly 10% of you have been asked lots of times, more times than you can count. Okay, so when we're looking at the different types of content that float around a company, the product content, there is content that's written by technical writers, there's content that's written by technical support or perhaps customer success, and there's content that is written by customers, by their own contributions, perhaps on a community site. And we'll look at each of those in turn. We'll start with product documentation. We'll look at what that's like, and then we'll compare that to the support content. And then finally, we'll look at community content and see how these things can come together. So let's start with product documentation. What does product documentation do? Well, the most important thing about product documentation, the first thing to understand is that technical writers, they create publications. they create manuals. So whether you're writing in Ditta and you're using bookmaps, or whether you're writing in Flare projects or in Poligo or in FrameMaker or wherever you're writing, it's always in the using the paradigm of a book. Okay? And what you do when you write, of course, is that you document the product features. But if you're a little bit more modern, then you don't just document the features, you document user tasks. And then you try to imagine how people are using those features, and then document the tasks. It's a very formal kind of thing. So, whatever the style of the company is, that's your style. It's extremely important that you are representing the company using the company style guide, and it's very carefully chosen. So it's curated content. It's not wild. It's very carefully chosen what goes in and what goes out of a presentation. So if you take a look at the way in which you might build a documentation product, some kind of publication. And what you try to do as a writer is that you try to do this task analysis, and then you kind of arrange your tasks in a tree, okay? It's a kind of hierarchy that then becomes your table of contents. So here, for example, is an installation guide, which might be split into the prerequisites and the software and the hardware and the client installation. And when you're looking at the prerequisites for the hardware, then you're looking at large and small size and so on. And when you're looking at the installation, you're looking at different operating systems. And you kind of spread this tree out that has multiple levels of hierarchy. That's usually the way writers work when they create product documentation. And that's absolutely fine. This hierarchy that you create is a natural part of creating a publication. So when you look at the top left corner of this slide, you can see what a typical topic might look like, okay? So what you've got, for example, are steps, possibly sub-steps and tables tables inside steps and notes and tips and warnings and so on, and bullets inside steps. It's very nested and very convoluted, but very precise, okay? And of course, you have your task tree usually to one side. Okay, that's your table of contents, or maybe a set of related links that come from your table of contents. Either way, this navigation through this task tree is an important part of what you do. Okay, lots of technical writers, they also love to talk about single sourcing, so that you write it once and then insert that text in many different places. And this is an important way to make sure that all of your content is consistent. And there are loads and loads of tools to do this. And many of you will be familiar with some of those tools like Flare and Oxygen and Poligo and XMetal and FrameMaker and so on and so forth. Loads of them out there, whether it's structured or unstructured, it's pretty much the same type of experience that we are talking about. So when you have this hierarchy of tasks as a publication, okay, what you do then is that you need to create some output. And in a bygone era, you might have created a printed manual. But more likely today, you're creating a PDF, or you're creating web help, which can then be put on the web or sent along with the product. If you put it on the web, it usually goes inside a documentation portal. And that documentation portal often houses more than one publication. And then, of course, you have a search box, perhaps a search box for each publication, or if you're lucky, then that search box covers all your publications. And then once you go inside a publication, then you can start to navigate. So you've got these books, publications, with this rich hierarchy of tasks, okay? And then you start navigating between these tasks. This is very important if you're going to find the content that you're looking for. You can navigate by, for example, looking at your table of contents. You can open the table of contents if it's not visible, or if it's already visible, then you'll just be able to browse and see that task tree and then navigate between one topic and another. Okay? You might go next topic and previous topic to navigate your publication, or you could perhaps have a list of related links. And those related links could be in relationship tables or however you want to do them, but those related content, it's also part of navigation. Because if you perform a search, for example, and you go to one topic and you might be in a related topic, but it's not quite what you're looking for, then you use all of these tools that you see on the screen now to find the content that you're looking for. And since documentation is built to be read, it's very important, of course, to be able to find your content. So this navigation through your tree of tasks is essential to making your content work. So if you take a look at your documentation portal, for example, what are the things that you can do? Well, you might want to add tags to your documentation so that you can then narrow down your search to the content that looks yellow in this diagram, or the content that looks blue. Maybe the yellow one refers to admin content and the blue one refers to end user content, or maybe each of these belongs to different products or different audiences and so on. And this is a very common way for people to work. It's metadata, and we use it all the time, these tags. So that's product documentation. Okay, you have these publications in these rich task trees that sit in a documentation portal or are outputted as web help or PDFs. Okay, so now that we've looked at product documentation, let's take a look at support tech notes at these KB articles, and let's see what those are. Okay, well, they're written by people in customer support, and they're basically these knowledge-based articles, these tech notes. And these knowledge-based articles are usually things that document problems and their workarounds. Now, if you think about what we were talking about a second ago, we were talking about product documentation that documents how things ought to work. So when everything is working fine, check out the manual. But if something's not quite working fine, okay, if there's a problem, then that's when you would look at support content. So these two might overlap a little bit, but on the whole, they don't really overlap. One is when the product is working fine, and the other one is when the product is not working so fine, usually, okay? And this is much more reactive content, okay? You are reacting to what customers have been asking. And the purpose, of course, is to save the company money. Why? Because if the more people who serve themselves, they don't need to spend time on the phone with support agents solving these problems. Okay, so if we're looking at these support tech notes, how does that pan out? Well, when you open a tech note and you need to fill one in, okay, you go to your KB tool site, you look at this template, and this template is very clearly divided into the title, which might be the problem description, and then the problem, a description of the problem or the symptom, perhaps the cause, and then the solution, or maybe it's not called a solution, it's called a workaround. But this is basically the format that you would find all of these support tech notes. But what's key here is that this is really a standalone article. And this is really important to understand, because a minute ago we were talking about trees of tasks that are really interdependent with one another. And here we're talking about the beginning of a story and the end of a story, all encapsulated in one single article, okay? Which means that it's a very different kind of animal, okay? And it has a much simpler structure. We're not talking about nested notes inside steps and tables and so on. It's much, much, much simpler with a more simple formatting, maybe you can add some screenshots and so on. And so these tools that you find that have been born from the need to create knowledge-based articles use wiki-like editors because they are written in a much simpler structure. Okay, so how does this pan out then? So we're trying to do a parallel study, and we saw what it was like for a documentation portal. For a KB portal, basically, you have these flat knowledge-based articles that are searchable. Okay, when you look at these flat knowledge-based articles, one of the things that you can do is add tags, just like you could do with your product content. Lots of people add metadata. You can add metadata to these knowledge-based articles as well. And then what this allows these guys to do is to create what is commonly called in this world collections. These collections are loosely linked KB articles that are gathered together by virtue of the fact that they share the same tags, okay? So it's flat, and this kind of creates some kind of structure. And if you're really lucky, then you can have tags within tags as well. And this is how they can kind of, perhaps maybe, fake a hierarchy, this idea of a hierarchy. But to understand why these collections are usually flat or limited in their depth, it's because they are born as standalone knowledge articles. Okay, so we've looked at product documentation. We've looked at support content. Let's take a look at community content. Community content is wildly different than either of those. Okay, here it is not written by anybody in the company that you're working with. These are created by your customers, the users. So they post questions, and other users post answers to those questions. So it's kind of like a long thread. Okay, so it's kind of crowdsourced content. And what you do is that you try to gain credibility by voting or by winning awards so that your answer might be seen as more reliable than others. And of course, it's created in order to open bottlenecks, okay? We don't want people in support stuck answering questions again and again. And maybe there's some content in there. Maybe there's some questions that people have, and it's not in the KB articles. So this kind of fills that gap a little bit, and it leverages the expertise of your audience, okay? So what does that look like? What does that feel like? Well, it's an even simpler web form this time. You have a title, which is your problem description, and then you just write to your heart's content. Okay, you just write what your problem is. Guys, please help me. I've got this, and I really need your help. It's another standalone article. And then there's just a thread of answers. So you can push reply to the thread and then post what you think it might be. It's a bit like the blind leading the blind, but hopefully not, because hopefully there's a kind of expert in there somewhere. And these community sites, well, there are loads of them out there, but again, there's a wiki-like editor, and what they do is this, exactly this. They try to crowdsource information to help users when there are gaps in the documentation and in the KBs, okay? So how does that pan out? Well, it's exactly the same. We've got this flat knowledge base full of people who write their opinions about what the answers are, okay? So let's just take a step back at these three types of content for a second. Let's look at what you've learned. As you can see, they all look very similar. They all slap a large search box on the front page. It's all product content. So what's going on? Well, you've got curated content. That's carefully curated content. That's your documentation portal, right? And there, the things that you are documenting are the features, okay? You're doing it using task trees, and you're hopefully documenting some value of those features as well. It's written by technical writers, and it's using the authoring tools that are often often out there for documentation content, and is posted hopefully to a doc portal or maybe to a PDF. And you're basically looking at the features and tasks of the product when it's working fine. Okay, so you've got curated content. Then you've got reactive content. That's your KB, that's your knowledge base. This is a reaction to customer problems. Okay, when customer support reps, they hear this question again and again, they write this stuff in order to help for self-service. And this is, of course, a flat knowledge base, like we've spoken already, and we have, and this is a reaction to customers. That's why we call it reactive content. And then over here, we've got community content. That's the third type. This is crowdsourced. Okay, so we've got curated, reactive, and crowdsourced content. Crowdsourced content comes from the crowd, comes from the users. This is filling in the gaps of the knowledge base and of the product documentation in order to help with self-service by posting it to a community site. So these are the three suspects: curated, reactive, and crowdsourced. But I've got to say that from a customer point of view, nobody really cares. Okay, they don't care who wrote it. They don't care where it is. They just want answers. Everybody is looking for product answers, and preferably they'd like it here, please. Because if I have to go to one site and look for one type of content, but I'm never quite sure if I'm seeing everything, so then I have to go to another site and then to another site just to make sure that I'm getting everything. It reduces the reliability of your sites, and it makes it very hard for people to rely on what it is that they are seeing. And then, of course, the whole point of self-service goes down, because if you can't rely on what you're seeing, then you end up calling people, and then your ROI goes through the floor. So everybody wants answers, and they want it in one place. So our task, therefore, is to try to unite all of these types of content together, okay, in one place. So how do we do that? So that comes to the second part of this presentation, which is how to try to unite these types of content together, what works and what doesn't. So let's look at the approaches that we have for uniting content, for trying to break down these silos, as lots of people say. So one approach is the single pane of glass. The idea that you put everything into a single site, into one site. So if you have, for example, a doc portal, then you try to squash in the KB stuff and the community stuff, okay? And then everybody goes here, right? That's the idea. And this was very popular and very common 5 or 6 years ago. Everybody was talking about a single pane of glass. That's what they wanted to do. But what we've found is that people actually want to have their own site, okay? So the doc people want to have their site, the support people want to have their, and people don't want to let go. They don't want to have just one site where everybody goes to and somebody else owns that. So because of the way that companies are built and because of the way that people are, we have found that lots of people actually want all content in each site. So the doc people get to keep their doc site and will put support content and KB content in there, KB content and community content in there. And then you've got the support site, and so we'll put the documentation in there and the community stuff in there. And you've got the community site, and we've got to put the doc stuff and the KB stuff in there too, right? And of course, let's not forget that if your content is public, then you've got Google, right? And all of the other search engines out there, and there you want to have all your content available. So the paradigm on the right says, no matter where you are, That's where we want all of the content to be, okay? So it's always going to be consistent. You're always going to get a full picture, and you get the answer to your question. And then nobody cares who wrote it, okay? Because they just want an answer. So how might you do that? So let's imagine a situation, as lots of people have been put in, and I was put in some time ago, where I was asked to try to take my hierarchical documentation and to squash it into a knowledge base. What would that look like? So what happens is that because knowledge bases don't have this concept of hierarchy built in the same way that documentation tools do, it squashes it, okay? And it flattens it. And people who have this in their workplace, they feel that the depth of the trees that they are allowed to create are limiting and asphyxiating. It makes it hard for them to do what they really need to do, okay? Now, there's a reason that people try to do this. They want to keep their rich editor. But just like me, I was put in this awkward position where these guys already have a KB tool. This is all documentation, so come on, just put your stuff in there, right? So you get to keep your nice editor, whether it's Polygo or Flare or whatever you're using, if it's Ditto or whatever, but we want you to publish into a KB. And they find that they have to try to marry the deep task trees that they originally created with the limitations of these very flat collections that we were talking about before, those tagged collections that kind of make a pseudo hierarchy. That's what they have to work with, and it's very hard. It's very hard to navigate your task tree properly with next and previous. It's very hard to have related links that really make sense on a hierarchical way. And of course, the whole idea of a table of contents and the way in which your tasks might be structured, it's very severely limited, okay? Now, because we're talking about navigation, I just wanted to take a second to talk about another type of navigation, which is also relevant to documentation people everywhere. And that is the idea of workflows. Now, workflows are very strange little things because a workflow can take very specific topics that don't necessarily arrange themselves nicely in your task tree, and to create some kind of workflow based on that, okay? And you may have, for example, a getting started for API, something like that. And then you would have a workflow that wouldn't quite fit your task tree, but would pick out some salient topics just about this. And of course, workflows might run across publications, across products, or across your task trees. And you would have to kind of stitch together a workflow like this, okay? Now, this is something that lots of people come up against a great deal. And of course, when you think about these workflows and you think, okay, this type of person will need to have this type of workflow. Well, clearly, when we're personalizing content, perhaps a different role, a different type of audience would have a different workflow through the same pool of content. And that kind of workflow like this, if you look at it like that, it looks a little bit like a metro map. And this is the kind of thing that we are very interested in looking at in terms of the way that that product content is moving, the direction the product content is moving, the idea that you can assemble workflows dynamically and create a graphical representation of those workflows without too much hassle. So we see this quite a lot, and this is another aspect of navigation that I just wanted to mention. Okay, so back to our idea of uniting silos. Okay, so how do we do this? So one idea is we've got these three types of content. We've got our knowledge base articles, we've got our doc portal, and we've got our community site, okay? And one idea is perhaps to use federated search. There are a number of tools out there, and the basic idea of federated search is that it slaps a big search box at the front of each one, okay? But it's a federated search box. And what that means is that it indexes all of your silos, okay? It collects the content of all of them, and then it provides a search results list. And that search results list could come from any of these silos, okay? Now that's very useful. It's a little bit like what Google does, right? So when you go to Google, it indexes dozens and dozens of different sites, and then you have these search results. And when you look at your search results, then each search result could lead to a completely different world. So you click on the first one, it goes into one world. You click on another one, and it goes into a completely different world. But in our case, when you're looking at product content and people just want their answers, okay, this whole idea of being pulled into different sites and then having to come back to your search results and then perhaps being pulled into another site somewhere else with a completely different way of looking at things, whether you've got cases at the top or you've got publications at the top, the whole UX paradigm is very, very different, and it leads to a disjointed user experience. Okay, so if federated search is one answer, but it's not an ideal answer because you've got this disjointed thing, how else might we unite the silos? And another way of doing it is, like we showed before, this whole idea that each site would have its own version of everything, okay? So how would we do that? Well, you could have the support content, the KBs, you would have your community content, and your documentation content with all of its rich hierarchies all in the same place, okay? And this is a very powerful idea that wherever you are, if you happen to land in, say, a community site, you would see your entire documentation with all of its richness. You would see all the KB articles, all the community posts, all in one place. Same menus, same UX, and if you're in the doc portal, same deal, okay? And then you'd be able to have your content tagged across the board, all of the different types of content. You'd have a single search to rule them all, and one analytics to be able to find out what kind of content people are looking at. You won't have this fragmented user experience, right? It sounds amazing, right? So this idea, take for example, this page, this topic in the doc portal, okay? The same topic in the doc portal with all of its richness and all of its task hierarchy, you can show that entire topic exactly the same with all of its richness and all of the navigation also in, for example, Salesforce Community, without any compromises, without any squashes, okay? And this, we believe, is the golden pathway. This, we believe, is the aim that everybody should get to, where you have a single site, no compromises, a single UX, a single analytics, covering everything. You get your answers in one place because we're all doing this for our customers, right? Okay, so this leads us to the second polling question and the last polling question, which is if you'd like to discuss this further with us, if you would, then just click yes, please. And we'll be very happy to discuss this with you some more. Okay, so if you could click on your voting now. And while you do that, I'll take you through the final summary slide, which started with us being asked to add our documentation in the knowledge base, okay, and how awkward that felt, and the realization that basically the reason that people are doing this is that they want their customers to get all of their answers in a single place, okay? We spoke about what happens when you try to import those rich, deep task trees into a knowledge base, and how that kind of flattens the task tree to these collections, but still allows you to keep your authoring tool in some cases. We spoke about federated search and how that's one way of making sure that you have your content in without any compromises. But of course, federated search means that you're switching in and out of different sites, so you have the wrong user experience or a disjointed user experience. So what we think that you should be looking for, okay, is that you should have all content of all the sites in one place, whichever place that is. And each place that you believe people should go to, they should be able to get their product answers, okay? We need to be able to preserve the richness of product content. That's why we build those task trees in the first place. And we need to, ideally, be able to support these dynamic workflows that we were looking at a moment ago, have a single unified user experience in each of these sites, and have the same analytics as you go through for each of these sites as well, and then centralize them all together in one place. And that wraps up my presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. I've got some questions from the audience and a few questions I developed on my own. We'll start with the audience questions, though. The first one is, what was really a comment and a question. What about training content? Could that be a fourth type of content that you might want to bring together into one place?
Absolutely. So training content is a little bit interesting because it's also very carefully curated. There's often a lot of single sourcing that goes on between training content and product documentation. And training content often adds the whole experience of being tested, of arranging things in modules, which are also deep and hierarchical, and the whole idea of courses and of course, certification. So you have a slightly different approach where every person has their own progress through the course, monitored and rewarded with a certification at the end. But this is definitely another type of product content. Absolutely true. No question.
Hi, excellent. And I probably know the answer to this question too, but I will allow you to elaborate. Should we, or should we add marketing content to the mix with the objective to have all that content inside the KB?
Right. So marketing content is very interesting, and I like this question. It's a great question. Marketing content is usually content that is very rich in value and very focused on trying to get leads. This is very important and, of course, critical to the company's success. And what we are beginning to see is that the marketing department, they manage to procure huge budgets in order to artificially try to generate traffic to a site in order to get those leads, in order to generate interest. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, you've got these technical writers and these support people who are always generating highly relevant content all the time. Okay, and we feel that these two really do need to be married together. Now, maybe product content and product documentation and marketing content don't need to be searched in much the same way. Maybe they do. That would depend on a company. But definitely putting the documentation front and center inside a marketing website, we feel is a great way for marketing people to win and for the documentation people to win, and for the support people to win, because the marketing people get the traffic and get the dynamic content, and the support people and the documentation people get the traffic in order to resolve their answers. It's a win-win situation. So we feel that embedding documentation inside a marketing website is a huge winner.
I was going to say it's also a huge winner for the customer, depending upon who you are as a customer. As a customer myself, I could say that marketing misses many opportunities to upsell me because I might own a version of their product, that, let's say, a digital product, some software or electronic, that gets updated and upgraded over the years. And as a result, my challenge that I'm calling about is related to product X version, right, of the product. The product Y is available, I just don't own it. So I call support eventually because I can't find the answer to my question. And support ends up having to tell me, which I find ironic, support has to tell me that I'm not on the most current version. And that I can easily upgrade it. I wouldn't have the problem at all, and I wouldn't have to call support because the new version doesn't actually have that problem. And so I feel like the disconnect between marketing means that the sales enablement function that marketing content can help with is missing from there. So should we be limiting the path to success to self-help, or should we be adding kind of connections to other departments so that the dependencies there, right, can be surfaced up, not just an answer to a query?
Exactly. So if I were, as I just described before, if I were to put my product content directly together with marketing content, because the marketing content is front and center stage, right? And if I were to put my product content together with the marketing content, we're already getting somewhere with your scenario. And if I further then some of the best doc portals, what they allow you to do is to very subtly help the company upsell. Because if I type in a search term, and that search term is resolved in a later version, then hopefully, if the doc portal is good enough and is up to the task, then what it can do is it can figure out that what you have, the product version that you have, it can figure out that it's an old version, that you really should be exposed also to old content and also to new content. And then you can perhaps be exposed to new features that perhaps you don't have with your content today. And search preferences is one of those things which we feel is really the future of product documentation, where you can percolate up the promoted content, the content that you're very interested in your customers having, which can make the content work for you. It can make the content help you make more money. And the most amazing things happen when technical writing departments and support departments are not just cost centers, but they start to really contribute to making the company more money, to increasing sales, to increasing upsales and so on. It really changes the power dynamic within the company as that takes place.
I hear some growth specialists screaming amen right about now. So I think that you're on to. I'm also going to reinterpret some questions for you because I have a feeling people have a specific bent, and I'm going to negate that here for a minute. So I'm reinterpreting a question. Should we be worried about inaccurate content being posted to a KB by the community, right? We can't trust the community. Heavens, they might make a mistake or be inaccurate, and we're not. So my question to you is, how much are companies that you see who are trying to marry community content with official content worried about the community content being accurate? Are they really putting community content people through an internal review process, or is there a different approach that you've seen to try to maintain some quality amongst the community submitted information?
Right. That's a great question. So there are two approaches to the way that people handle community content. One is to put a moderator on, but of course, the more content that comes into the community, the more that needs to be moderated, and it just becomes incredibly effort intensive. So people find ways to try to to self-regulate by having these voting systems and everything else. But you can't get away from the questioner's question, which is that it's a little bit like the blind leading the blind, right? So you don't know whether people, even if they've been voted very high, how reliable that content is, which is exactly why you need to have the official content, which is the product documentation or things written by support related to this knowledge, related to this community post right there alongside. So imagine a situation where the blind are leading the blind, but then you have a sidebar which says, check out this product documentation, which looks like it's very, very similar to what you're talking about. This is the official way of doing things. So I have a phone, and you know, if it gets wet or something like that, and you go to these forums and they say, put it in a rice bowl, no, put it in the microwave, no, don't put it in the microwave. You know, everybody is guessing, but wouldn't it be amazing to have Samsung or Apple or whoever it is, the official vendor, with their answer right there while everybody is busy guessing, right? And then you have an authoritative single source of truth. That is the purpose of marrying these different content together. Then it automatically lends itself weight because it has authority, because it's written by the company, right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that this question was aiming at was I think they were focused on the prevention of bad information being surfaced up to customers. And I personally believe that it shouldn't be a goal to prevent it. It might be a goal to learn from it and improve from it, because many times the ideas that are submitted might not be the official party line of the company, but I've watched many teams read community submitted information and think, wow, I never even thought about using our product that way. So the unique viewpoint of the audience could be a source of future improvement data as well. So you've got tons of other questions. Let me try to zoom through these, because you and I could go on forever on this topic. While nobody cares who wrote it, the reader might be a customer who really doesn't want all the detail from the documentation. There needs to be guidance to the level of readership to be responsive to user needs. So I would say, Lawrence, I think in the past, you and I and other members of the Zoomin software company have presented webinars on the Content Wrangler channel about role-based and level-based personalization. I think that's what they're after there. Can we accomplish that in the Knowledge Center? Can we tag things as beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and then be able to surface them up in a more precise manner?
Sure, why not? So if you have if you tag your content for different types of roles, and as you said, you have beginner stuff, or you have super users with you know, Linux hacks and so on. There are loads of ways in which you could write the same content depending on how you target your audience. And using tags is an effective way to make sure that the people who are reading it get the content that they need at their level. Absolutely. It's part of personalization.
Excellent. And there's a question, you can tell our audience attracts some knowledgeable people who have already had experience with things like single sourcing and intelligent content and bringing everything together under one house and then pushing it out to multiple destinations. But there are many people who are not familiar with that process. And so the question that we sometimes get, and we also got it today, was, so what is the solution to present everything in one place? So I'll take a stab at answering it, and then you can too. For those of you who would like to know about how to present or keep everything in one place and then push it to all the places that are needed, get your pencils ready, because you'll want to write down, or your keyboard, you'll want to type the names of these two books: Managing Enterprise Content, A Unified Content Strategy. Once again, Managing Enterprise Content, A Unified Content Strategy by Anne Rockley, R-O-C-K-L-E-Y. That book explains exactly how to do that and has been in practice as a methodology for about 20 years now, so it's a sound and tested method. Anne Rockley wrote a book with me, Scott Abel, called Intelligent Content, A Primer, in which we attempt to explain it in more common layman's terms, especially so that marketers and training people and others who are not technical writers could also get it. So what's your advice? How do we put everything into one place?
Well, I think having an effective and intelligent content strategy, as you outlined there, is extremely helpful. But you also want to have an approach that doesn't murder the content in the process. In other words, you don't want to be squashing your task trees. You don't want to be removing tags. You don't want to have to twist your content in order to fit a paradigm that doesn't work. So you need the tools to really allow you that breadth and that depth of content and an effective search to help you find it. We think that those two things are really key in being able to give you that golden pathway, the best way to produce, to publish content without the compromises.
Perfect. So you'll need a single content repository. You'll need a structured and standardized way of authoring content, and of course the taxonomy and metadata to support the routing by the system of the information to the appropriate person. And speaking of taxonomy, there's a question in here that asks about structured taxonomy and that it would require one that's really detailed to do all these things, right? And it turns out they asked for some suggestions. I'm going to advise this particular viewer that the Content Wrangler channel on Bright Talk, the network you're using to watch the webinar today, has several webinars in which this topic has already been covered by folks at Zoomin. They, in fact, talk about how to use taxonomy to tag up content and deliver it to the right person. Lawrence, do you have any suggestions for where to start thinking about taxonomy?
Sure, we'll be happy to speak to anyone about that. We often do consultations, just shooting the breeze and figuring out what kind of taxonomy would work for your company. Just because you have a complex ecosystem, it does not mean that your taxonomy has to be unwieldy and complicated. Okay, so one of the things that we try to do is to have a simple but effective taxonomy. And this is always about looking first at how the content is being used, okay, how it's being consumed, not how it's being produced, but how it's being consumed, and then work backwards from there. So you start with the use and then work backwards to create a taxonomy that works for you.
Excellent. We are running out of time, so I'm going to move on and just let the attendees know who had submitted questions that we did not have time to answer, that I will send those to the marketing team at Zoomin, and maybe Lawrence and the marketers can put together a couple of answers to some of the questions that you asked that we didn't get time to address. Also, if you would like to hear from Lawrence and ask him some questions privately, as you know, in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel, you can request a consultation with them. My clients have a good experience with Zoomin, so I can speak from experience and say that if you do that, it will be a good experience, and it's not overly high pressure sales or anything. They're really trying to figure out how to help you get the most value from your content. So speaking of Zoomin, today's show has been brought to you by the folks at Zoomin. Definitely check out their blog at zoominsoftware.com and learn more about the products that they provide. The Zoomin platform plugs into other tools and works well with things like ServiceNow and Salesforce. So if you are also contemplating bringing all that content together, those are the people that you want to talk to. Check them out at zoominsoftware.com. And let's thank Lawrence for being our presenter today. Give him a rating on the way out the door, if you would, 1 through 5 stars, using the Rate This feature on your webinar viewing panel. Lawrence, thanks for joining us today and for making time during a different time zone. I know it's sometimes inconvenient, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
There's also some additional content in the attachments section about Lawrence and about Zoomin. If you'd like to check it out, you can do so there. I'm your host, Scott Abel, and I hope that you'll come back and watch one of our webinars on demand. We've got about 280 webinars now in our video webinar archive. They're all recorded. You can share them with others just with the simple click of a button, so definitely check them out. keyword search the brighttalk.com platform for words that are of interest to you, and you'll find a ton of different webinars available for you. Let's also encourage you to join our LinkedIn community. We've got almost 15,000 members over there now discussing content all the time. So definitely check that out if you're a member of LinkedIn. And I'm going to give away a few conference tickets before we sign off today. We're going to give away a free all-access pass to 3 people. Let's see who they are. The winners of Information Development World Conference ticket is Jan Falcona of Service Autopilot, and also Vanessa Peacock of Finio, and finally, last but not least, Jay Evans of Oracle Corporation. Each one of you will receive a free conference pass worth about $2,000 to Information Development World. We hope that you'll join us this February the 25th through the 27th in beautiful Palm Springs, California, for our annual conference where we're going to be discussing how to build information-enabled organizations, and we'll be tackling some of the questions that were submitted by the audience today as well. So we hope that you'll join us. Until then, thanks for joining us. You've been watching The Right and the Wrong Way to Bring Documentation into Your Knowledge Base with Lawrence Orin. Thanks for joining us for today's show. I appreciate it. And as always, keep doing great work. See you again in another webinar in the future.